I don't like that. My glamorous team here. So we have Edwin, Steve, and Craig, who have not been coached. So today you're going to hear the real journey, ups and downs. So I think, first of all, could you just introduce yourself to where you went for your surrogacy journey? Whether you have 1 child, 2 child, 3 children, 5, you haven't got enough grey hairs for 5, but maybe just give a little intro as to who you are and where you had your journey, please.
Shall I start? Hello, can you hear me? There we go, that's better. So I'm Craig. I have a little girl who's 4.5 called Scarlett. And I had a surrogacy journey which involved a US egg donor. I used the Idaho Center for Reproductive Medicine in the US and a Canadian surrogate from Kitchener, which was just outside of Toronto. And I've only got one. I'd like to have probably 8 or so, but it hasn't happened yet. So that's me.
Thank you, and good luck with the 8, by the way. But I'm Steve. I'm a Belgian, actually, so I came all the way from Belgium to talk to you today and share my experience of having or being a happy parent. So I'm the father of Jaden. He will be turning 3 on Monday, and we have done our journey in Canada. So our egg donor is Canadian. The surrogate is Canadian, the clinic is in Canada. We have worked together with Babies Come True, who is just outside with a boot. We are now just starting our sibling journey, so we're still at the early stages of the sibling journey. So hopefully by next year, this time we will have a second child, a little brother or sister for Jaden.
Yay. Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Edwin. I'm from Sweden, and I'm here today not only to speak to you about this. I had a surrogacy journey in the United States 1.5 years ago. I had the birth of my little daughter, Zoe, with my husband, Ola. So I'm here to speak to you guys, but I'm also here with Hatch Egg Donation and Surrogacy and PFCLA, Pacific Fertility Center, Los Angeles. So you could say that my surrogacy journey is never ending. So now I'm in the trenches of the surrogacy industry and the surrogacy business. And to be honest, it's the most amazing thing to be able to speak to people about this experience. It's one of a kind, up and down, but it's an amazing experience. And obviously, you get your child. And so I'm also doing a second journey, actually. Crazy, I don't know. So it's going to be amazing. Also starting off like you. So I used surrogacy in the United States, egg donation and surrogacy, and the clinic was actually Pacific Fertility Center.
Well, obviously, my next question doesn't apply to you why you chose your jurisdiction then. So maybe I can ask Craig and Steve, what made you choose this particular jurisdiction, if you're happy to share that?
Sorry. Thank you. Well, let's be honest. The financial aspect is important. The process is not cheap. That was one of the main reasons why we decided to go to Canada. For us, being Europeans, of course, if you look at the fees, we win a lot with the conversion rates. So that is one of the biggest reasons that convinced us to go to the to Canada and follow the Canadian route. But the other biggest aspect is the type of relationship we were looking and the way everything is done through Canada. Also the fact that we know that there is a legal framework, that everything is, let's say, written down. We know that we're not doing anything against the law. We know that what we do is with a lot of respect for the surrogate. Not just the surrogate, but also her family, her relatives, her husband, the children, anyone involved. And the same goes with the egg donor. So when we talk about this journey, it's not only the surrogate, but in our case, also the egg donor. So we wanted to be able to convey and be proud about our journey when we talk about it, when we share our journey with people, with you, for example, but especially with our son, with our family members. We want to be able to proud to say what we're doing and not ashamed of feeling like we're exploiting someone or just having a transaction and then having a baby in return. But going the Canadian route, we have that very close relationship with our surrogate and the egg donor. We consider ourselves as an extended family. which for us was extremely important, to stay in contact, for our son to be able to get to know who helped us bring him to the world and helped us to build our family. So that was the biggest aspect that we found that in other countries were not the same, or were not as easy to achieve that kind of relationship while meeting our budgets.
Great, thank you. I'm trying to think why we went for a Canadian route. I guess, first of all, I tried to get my boyfriend pregnant lots of times and it hadn't worked for us. So it did have to be surrogacy in the end, and he was Canadian. But that wasn't why we went for a Canadian route. In the end, I think we chose Canada because we really liked that it was compatible with our values and our ethos, and the fact it was altruistic. It's a well-organized country, the infrastructure is great. It seems a very accepting and positive place to be. And it seems a very healthy country. Just a stereotype of millions of people as being healthy, but it was just a lovely place, we thought. And somewhere that we'd like to spend time together when our child was born as well. And that was a logistical consideration. And from our research and my partner's knowledge, it was pretty straightforward in Canada as well. There wasn't a language problem. The systems and procedures were straightforward. And so that's why we went for that route. And we used a US egg donor, as I've said. If I'm really honest with you, as much as we wanted a baby and I'd done some research, I'd kind of hit a brick wall with the research, because I think you can only go so far until you actually jump in and find out. Because if you look at lots of the providers, I'm sure they all offer the world and it's great, etc., etc. And it's easy to get bogged down in that. And not saying the attention to detail doesn't matter, but sometimes or at some point you just have to make a decision. And so we did, and that was the route we took. And similar to you, the relationship with our surrogate and her family was really important to us. And so they got to hold Scarlett when she was born. We remain in contact. We send photographs. In that Scarlett knows who her surrogate is and her journey into the world, and tells everybody at school all the time, and is really proud of it. And that's what we're proud of as well. So, and it was amazing. And I also will say that from a being able to sleep at night point of view, I'd really expert legal advice over here, actually via Karen's firm, not that that's why I'm here. And that really, I guess it dealt with a lot of the nitty-gritty things which, if I'm honest with you, I didn't understand all of it. And so to be able to place that trust and that get sorted out, it actually meant that we could sit back and we could really enjoy our pregnancy and get excited about that. So,
obviously, we've talked about Canada being altruistic, which is why you've chosen that. But just to give Edwin the comfort to talk about that, even if there's a commercial arrangement in America, I do understand that the same principles of the surrogate and the relationship apply. Perhaps you just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said. For me, researching, I was totally new to surrogacy and I was overwhelmed. But one thing I really found out when I researched was that the screening and testing in the US is extensive. So for me, I felt like, who is this woman who's going to carry my child? What is her situation? Financially, mentally, socially, all of those aspects. And the more I dug into it, the more I could find about the processes in the US and how thorough they were. So that's exactly like you guys are saying. There's tests and checks in place, which I think are important for me to be able to tell my daughter, you know, this is the woman who carried your child, and you can speak to her, we can go and meet her, and she was in no dire need to do this. It came from a humanitarian side. Yes, in US, there's compensation involved, and I think that's fair because she's doing something amazing for you as a couple. But the altruistic kind of humanitarian side is really what made me choose the US as well. So I totally agree with what you said.
Just got one thing I did want to add to that. Is that in choosing our egg donor, we had an anonymous egg donor in the US. And to some degree, we found that quite challenging, actually, selecting our egg donor, because it puts you in a position of making choices about things that question your values and your ethics in part. And so it was in the US and all the testing was extensive. I mean, I had a spray tan in America and there was a 4-page disclaimer to have a spray tan. So can you imagine what it was like for an egg donor? It was epic. And we had so much information from, from how intelligent this person is and to the job her grandparents did, et cetera, and her hobbies and what she had for breakfast 5 years ago. And in the end, really, we made our decision on our egg donor based on if this person had similar interests. And from the photographs on whether she looked happy as a person. It sounds really simple, but being happy was important. But for me, the biggest challenge wasn't even about that. It was about when you choose an egg donor that you have to choose a race of a child as well. You have to choose their ethnicity. And I guess my background, I worked in education and I worked with children and families of all backgrounds, and to be placed in a position of choosing race, I actually felt very odd about that. And so I had to give a lot of thought to that in the end. So that's, I guess, the only point I would make about that there are big, considerations in there as well. And so the reason we chose the donor we did is I had a friend who very nicely said to me, that your child will have a little bit extra to explain being the child of gay parents, let alone being the child of gay parents and of a different ethnic origin. And so she put it nicely that way. But I think it's up to you to think about that. But just it questions your ethics and your values in some ways.
I suppose that's not something everyone considers. You're choosing your surrogate, you're choosing your jurisdiction, but then there's another layer of choosing an egg donor. What about you, Steve? I mean, did you find that scary, helpful, hard work?
Well, it was a bit awkward, like what Craig mentioned. I always like to refer to it like kind of online dating or going on Tinder. You get like access to an online database. You see all those profiles. Initially, you see the pictures of the egg donors with some basic statistics, the age, location, things like that. And it is extremely, at least initially, it's extremely superficial because you have to take some key decisions about the race, for example, the eye colors or hair colors, the way that the egg donor looks like, the look and feel. Obviously, once you have narrowed down that selection, you have to look at the medical background, at least for an egg donor. That's one of the most important aspects, not just for the egg donor, but also for the siblings, the parents and grandparents. So it was awkward, and especially when you go through this process as a couple, each one of you will have, let's say, a short list, and you have to discuss your choices, but also defend or motivate your choices, because typically speaking, your short list of egg donors will more likely not match with your partner's choice. So it isn't easy, and it somehow makes you feel uncomfortable because it does sound so superficial. But then again, it's a personal choice whether or not you want. Well, we have taken the decision that we wanted our kids to kind of look like us or have some similarities. My partner, being from the Middle East, obviously has a different skin tone than I do. So we had a specific view on that topic, and we knew from the beginning that we wanted to have 2 kids. So for the first, and we also knew who would be the donor for the first journey, and the other partner would be the donor for the second journey. So from the beginning, we knew that for the first journey, we would pick an egg donor that kind of has my features. Would be Caucasian with light brown hair, items like that. And for the second journey, the goal was to have an egg donor that would have the features of my partner, for the kids to kind of look alike. But then we picked a known egg donor, and after the donation, we kind of fell in love with her. We really liked her. We liked talking to her, and we're still in contact with her. And she's just wonderful. So that made us think that, well, let's stop being superficial for the second journey, and instead, let's consider having our children a genetic link and use the same egg donor. So we decided to go for a second round, in a way of speaking, with a second donation using the same egg donor. And that way, in fact, it allows our children to be genetically related, but also for myself and my partner to be, through our kids, also genetically related as a family. So that's how we moved forward. So it is not what we initially planned to do, and plans will change along the journey. So that is probably one of the mistakes, or the mistake we made along our journey. Had we made the decision from the beginning, then we would have saved the additional costs of having to do a second retrieval, because back then we didn't have, or we didn't select the right package. Nowadays there are packages that will cover all that. Back then we decided not to go that, or not to pick that package, so that's why we had the additional cost. So once again, it is awkward, but we have to go through that, and it's a personal decision if you want your children to look like you or just go on the medical background. Ideally, I think you have to find the right balance between the looks and the medical aspect.
Edwin, can I ask you, since you're in the professional realm of this as well, how important is it, or can you ask if they're LGBT friendly, if there's any LGBT background? Because you haven't mentioned that, interestingly, which is lovely. How important is that to people?
Well, the answer to that is that you can know that up front. For example, in our database, you do have a very clearly stated which kinds of couples, if I can say that, or individuals that the egg donor would want to work with. So it's very clear on there. Funnily enough, as you say that, I realized that we didn't even consider that either when choosing an egg donor. I didn't really think I should find someone, specifically read that they want to work with the LGBTQ couple. But of course, it's important, during this journey, regardless if it's egg donation or the surrogacy part, you really want to work with an egg donor or surrogate who wants the same thing as you, whether that be being anonymous or known, having different preferences about couples or individuals, all these kind of preferences that's going to make your match either a good match or kind of a less good match, so to speak. So really, medical history is great. If you like, to go deep inside education or looks, understandable. But preferences is something you really need to consider. What do you really want? And as a couple, talk to each other, really know what you want before going inside the databases and looking. Yeah.
I mean, Craig's touched on you can do as much homework as possible, but until you're in it, there's quite a lot of work. And obviously, we help people along the journey, but not everyone does it with a lawyer. Sometimes we do it domestic. Taking a look back at what you did, what do you think was the hardest thing? What hurdles did you come across to sort of pre-warn people?
Should I start? Which part of the process are we talking about?
Well, I suppose anything. I mean, people here are very early on in the journey, probably picking jurisdictions, thinking about it. What can they anticipate as potentially the hardest part of this journey?
I think personally for me, starting in my journey, there were two things that lessons learned afterwards, right? So one of them was costs. So looking at costs, it's very easy to give you a number of what the surrogacy journey costs. But it's very hard to say exactly what the end result will be if you're not going with the fixed fee program, I guess. Then it's easier to say. So for me, it was really about costs. I had a variable program. I paid as I went through my journey. I spent, not to scare anybody off, but I spent 3 years with my journey. I had 4 different surrogates. So obviously my journey was going to be more expensive than kind of a straightforward journey. So that's one of the things, costs. The other thing is really to understand that every agency is different. When it comes to testing and screening, Canada and the US does great work, but the agencies do very different work amongst those countries. So to really understand what sets this agency apart is also a very important thing to understand. They might seem similar, but dig a little deeper and you're going to find the differences in how they work. So costs and agencies' capacity to screen and test, I would say.
Yeah. I think for us the most challenging or difficult or frustrating was the waiting times. Most of us want to have kids. We want to have kids as soon as possible. We know that we have to wait at least 9 months for the kid to be there. But then there are all the steps before we can actually start with the embryo transfer. We have the matching. We first need to sign up with the agency after doing all the research. The research will already take a few weeks, even a few months, sometimes a few years. And that takes so much time. And every step of the process is a major accomplishment. It is a major achievement. Yet, I wish that all these steps would go faster. And that's a little bit frustrating. But then when we come to the end result, when baby is there, you completely forget all those hassles. And all, the pain we went through or the frustrations we went through, and that's the most rewarding things we can do. Our journey from beginning, when we initially started looking into surrogacy, to birth of our son took 3 years. So we were lucky. We only had to work with one surrogate. We had 2 transfers, so we cannot complain at all. We're actually, I think, one of the lucky couples that had a positive pregnancy after 2 transfers. I also think it's important as intended parents to, at least that's the approach I had in our journey, is to have some kind of a pessimistical approach. Not to be negative, but to be prepared for the worst. Surrogacy, or not surrogacy, but pregnancy is a high-risk procedure. A lot of things can happen. And I just prepared for every step of the process. I prepared myself for the worst case. After the first transfer, when that first transfer didn't take, I accepted that. Of course, it's not a result that I wished had happened, but I prepared myself emotionally. Our surrogate, for example, because we do have that, we did, and we still do have that same connection, she was devastated. And we actually ended up having to comfort our surrogate because she felt so terribly bad for that failed transfer. She blamed herself, she thought that she did something wrong, and we actually ended up having to talk to her and make her feel good because we prepared ourselves for that worst case scenario. So that's maybe one of my advices towards you, but that's again my personal approach, not to be deceived or to be feeling bad when something bad happens, because it is a surrogacy journey. Bad things will happen. I don't think that any one of us had any setback. I think everyone had a setback in a surrogacy journey. That's something you have to expect. So be prepared for that to happen.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think that sometimes in life, if you expect the worst, it could only be better. I accept that approach. But when it came to surrogacy, I chose to turn that on its head. I think that when you attend a conference like this, which is incredibly informative, it's also very serious and complicated and so complex. And actually, I think that there's a danger in overcomplicating it. And so not to underplay that, I just think that at some point you have to decide you're going to enjoy it. It's a huge thing. And actually, if you're a gay intended parent using surrogacy, it's highly likely that you're doing that. Or at least if you are a man and gay, it's not because of medical issues, etc. It's just because of gender and all the rest of it that goes with it. So I think it's something to really enjoy. And so the way that we were able to do that is we found excellent legal support that underpinned it. We had a great agency who found our surrogate. And we had an amazing surrogate. The clinic we used, and going back to the LGBT question, that was pretty important to us. And so we did a little bit of research on that. And I have to say that we were treated exceptionally well, except when we went to the clinic, the nurse kept calling us her daddies. And in the gay male world, a daddy has a connotation of something else. And I didn't really want to be called a daddy by the nurse. But anyway, that's just me being sensitive and being older as a dad, not a daddy. And actually, our clinic looked like an old Italian restaurant, by the way. And another piece of advice is don't, I guess, judge it on if it looks, space age or something amazing. This one in Idaho looked like an Italian restaurant, but it was incredibly successful, and the clinical care was exceptional, and they were very LGBT friendly. So when we flew over to produce our sperm samples, which is a long way to go to have a wank, to be candid about it, actually, we were offered by Nurse Linda materials as gay men if we wanted assistance with any imagery. And so it was very inclusive to be able to do things like that. I mean, it's slightly embarrassing. You don't want to talk about things like that. But, you just have to talk about the ins and outs of it. And so I do think it's very easy to overly complicate it. The one thing I would say is that if you're choosing an agency, and not to do any agencies down, I think that all of them probably offer the world. And I think you only find out when you've bought into them. So the agency we chose offered the world and didn't give a quarter of that. So we got £8,000 back because I complained. But actually, we had a good solicitor behind us. We had a brilliant surrogate. It was in Canada, and we really enjoyed it. And I think that you need to plan how you will enjoy that journey and get excited. Absolutely be prepared if something doesn't work out, because that can happen. But I think you've got the right to be excited about it, because it's just probably the most exciting thing you'll do.
I know we've got a wrap up, but if you could give either a top tip or something you would do differently to support people out there thinking about it, what would it be?
I guess I'll start there. Be patient, and I know that the waiting time for surrogates is long. It takes a lot of time to find a surrogate. My advice is don't jump or don't pick the first profile, the first surrogate you get. I believe that the relationship with the surrogate is extremely important. Wait until you feel the butterflies in your belly. And that's really how it felt, at least for me and my partner. I don't know if it felt the same way for you, but when you were matched with your surrogate, when we were matched with the surrogate, I felt the butterflies. And we both knew that this was a surrogate we wanted to work with. And it was a second match. We didn't have the same feeling after we initially spoke with the first surrogate, but after the surrogate, we knew it. So although the waiting time to be matched or to find a surrogate is long, don't just take anyone, because I think it's so important that you have that mutual trust as well with the surrogate. We have the distance between Canada or the US and UK or wherever you live. So you have to put your full trust in the surrogate. She will be carrying your child. She has had children. She knows better what to do. She has the experience, not us. So you have to trust her. And I find that this might be difficult for most of gay men, because typically speaking, gay men like to have everything under control. And that is one aspect of the journey that we cannot control. We have to give the
what
control over.
What you're saying, officially on stage, women are the boss during this process. You have to listen to us.
We have, absolutely.
Did you hear that here?
Well, without women, we wouldn't be able to, that's a wonderful thing, and we wouldn't be sitting
one
here.
thing
exactly.
in the LGBT world we could take control of. And what about you, Craig?
I think that's actually the best advice. I think you have to accept what you can't control, because otherwise you'll stress yourself out trying to control it. And I think it isn't even about the contract, it's about the basic respect for the surrogate who is carrying your child, that you need to have that trust and respect for her before she carries your child, before you enter into it. I think that's absolutely critical, because I hear occasionally of people really overstepping the mark and trying to dictate what their surrogate eats and all kinds of things, and what should be her daily routine, etc. And actually this is someone who's doing something spectacular for you, and I think you just have to have that respect and trust, and sometimes you just have to learn to muzzle yourself along the way as well.
Yeah, I think I can only add on to that. And obviously, we're all jumping into the surrogate part, right? So I think that says a lot about the process itself. It is about financials. It is about, coordination, the legal stuff, insurance. But what you will remember from this journey, I think, when it's done, is the surrogate and your new family member, pretty much. Because we've all had surrogates, obviously. Obviously, we all speak very warmly about them. So that is the thing that's going to... Well, except for your child who will be running around and disturbing you all the time, that's the relationship that's really going to be new and unique to your life when comparing to before you went into it. So I do agree with having a good feeling, but also, maybe to be a little bit cynical, also make sure, that you get the information on the surrogate before the match. So sometimes you match with the surrogates and then afterwards you would know the details. I wouldn't accept that as an intended parent, especially not having gone through this journey. Make sure that you can be presented with, insurance considerations, lost wages, travel, all of that before you move forward to speak with the surrogate. You do not want to rematch with the surrogate. It's not fun. It takes a lot of emotional stress to go through that process again. So it's not about matching quickly, it's about matching correctly. So really try to keep that in mind. I know we all want children as fast as possible. I'm doing this journey again. So I really want a child tomorrow if possible, but that's not going to happen. Match wisely, do not match quickly.
trust me, I think most of us would love to have been pregnant and popped out in 3 months rather than 9.
It's also fun. It's also fun that 3 guys are sitting here talking about pregnancies. Like, what the hell do we know?
I mean, thank you so much for sharing the personal journeys. So I think you do your homework, you get good agencies, good ecosystem, good Legos, obviously. Be aware of the cost. But mainly, for me, it's the emotional part that's played ultimately everything to do with this, the surrogate. So, well done to all those lovely women out there that have done this for everybody, whether it's commercial or altruistic. Is there any questions out there that anyone would like to ask? Because you will be going through this journey. Now is your time to hear everything good, bad, and ugly. No?
We've traumatized them.
So I think you're right, be patient. But obviously, I think it's, like you say, dating apps to do a good video, be honest about who you are to the surrogate, and hope that mirrors the matching process. Look, thank you so much for taking your time out to help everybody else online and here today to understand that. And if I'm happy to offer that you can talk to them outside of here if they need to. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you
you
for your time.